Hello, everyone, and welcome back to What's Your Mess? Mental, Emotional, Social Status of Life. I am your host, Tracey D. Armstrong, and we are here again with another amazing episode with another amazing guest who is here to share their experiences that have shaped their lives and to let us know a little bit about what they've gone through and how they've overcome. And so I'll get out of the way and let my next guest introduce himself.
Yeah, Tracy, thank you so much for having me here. My name is David Woods Bartley. I am both a suicide attempt and a childhood rape survivor. And what I do is I travel around the world, quite frankly, and I share my journey, my mess, to put it into your beautiful words, my journey from mental hellness to mental wellness, to a place in which I think that we all deserve to experience. And I get to tell stories, and that's why I'm just feel so blessed to be part of the podcast today to share really what happened to me, how people supported me, and how I overcame the mess to be in a situation and feeling now in a way that, quite honestly, I never thought I'd feel this good. So I'm happy and just blessed to be here.
And I'm happy to have you here. And I know that I just want to go back. I want to say I love that title, from mental hellness to mental wellness. I love it. That is so, so true. Because you kind of said it, you kind of opened up a little bit. You had a mental hell that you were going through. And now you say you're at one of the happiest moments now in your life. So, can you tell everyone a little bit about whichever story you would like to dive into of that mental hell that you may have gone through?
Absolutely. And I think what would be most helpful would be to talk about the day. And it was August 31st, 2011. And that was the day that I was going to kill myself. And at the time, I was living on an incredible, perfectly rectangular 2.5-acre piece of property in Penryn, California, which is just about 30 minutes outside of Sacramento. And I remember waking up on that day, and I woke up and I went outside and took a walk around the property in this final experience of the property. Went inside, typed out a suicide note, which was a goodbye to my then wife and my family. And then I got in my fire engine red, and I say it because even my truck was emblematic of how I was feeling. Fire engine red Dodge Dakota pickup truck, and made a short 20-minute drive from where Deanna, my former wife, and I lived to what's known as the Forest Hill Bridge. Now, of course, everybody knows the Golden Gate Bridge. It's famous for lots of different reasons, including negative reasons. Most people don't know the Forest Hill Bridge, but it's 730 feet tall, 500 feet further off the ground than its more famous cousin. It's the fourth tallest bridge in the United States. Now, it's important to note, Tracy, that this was not the first time I had driven to the bridge. And one of the things that I talk about in the seminars and the talks and the workshops that I give is suicide is almost never spontaneous. It is so rare. It's almost never happens that somebody will have a thought of killing themselves and actually act upon it. It's not. It is something that becomes cumulative and be ruminate. And so I had been to the bridge before, so I knew the way. So park my vehicle, turn off the motor, put my hands on the 10 and 2 position of the steering wheel, take a deep breath, reach over, then grab the note, put that in the center of the dash, keys, center of the note, exit, make sure the door's unlocked, and ultimately made my way to the midpoint of the bridge. And the bridge at that point is perpendicular to 730 feet below is the North Fork of the River. Now, I pressed my body up against the barrier, which hit me right across the top of my chest, and I looked down to focus on the river. Now, it takes a body 7.5 seconds to fall 730 feet. And at that point, time and everything else is not even relevant, just the river, and focusing on this spot in the river. That's all that happened. But thankfully, because that bridge, like its more famous cousin, has an infamous reputation, somebody saw me, this body pressed up against this barrier, called 911, and a sheriff's deputy came, and he didn't make contact with me. He made connection with me. And that's the key difference. And ultimately, through a thing that we'll talk about a little bit later, maybe, is I was taken off the bridge to an emergency room and then to a psychiatric ward where I'd spend 15 days. And when people, Tracey, found out where I was and why, they couldn't understand it. They're just like that, like not David Bartley, just like anybody else, not this person.
Mm-hmm.
And really what confused them was because I was married to this wonderful woman, and on that 2.5 acres, we ran an animal sanctuary. And it was an amazing animal sanctuary called A Chance for Bliss. And Tracey, at one point, we had 100 animals on our property and properties around us, 25 horses, 23 dogs, 9 potbelly pig, goats, sheep, ducks, geese, bunnies, birds, turtles, and fishes. Like Noah was a rookie compared to what we were doing. And primarily thanks to the incredible heart, forgive me, of my former wife, we were primarily end of life. So we did no adoptions. So animals stayed until they went to that big green pasture in the sky. And on June 2nd, 2010, we were the cover story in the Life's section of USA Today. So I in no way fit the image of somebody who was suicidal. But what I tell people and what's happening all around us, and my brothers and sisters out there, is what hurts the most can't be seen.
Right.
And it's that underlying desperation and just nightmare from an emotional standpoint, from a thought standpoint, that people are suffering from, that get them to the place where they believe things that they shouldn't believe, most terribly, like that the world will be better off without them, because it's not true.
Right.
And so it has been since that place, all those years ago, 13 years ago, because of amazing human beings, which we can talk about, that was the hell. But it was, you would think, you think about a psychiatric ward and you think about, oh my gosh, I tell you what, that was an incredible place. It was, forgive me, I get
Take
really
your time. Take
emotional.
Your time.
It had a roommate named Daniel. And Daniel and I came from 2 entirely different socioeconomic backgrounds. And yet I remember there was at one point we were both on our beds, back up against the wall reading. And I remember looking over thinking, wow, we're not that much different. We were both here because of, I didn't know it at the time, but I didn't have a word for it, because of Hellness. And we're just in this space to be well. And the other people that I met there and the staff that was there, and my family, and I'm blessed to have an amazing family. You would think, like, oh, wow, he's in a psych ward. Maybe don't want to go there. You know what? Those 15 days, they came to visit every single day.
That's awesome.
And in fact, so this was again 13 years ago. So there was a payphone in the hallway. And if somebody wanted to talk to a patient, they would call this number that they got. And if it wasn't for you, if you walked by and you picked up the phone, it wasn't for you, you would just call out and say, hey, phone's for you. Tracy. By the third day, I got so many calls, the other patients literally refused to answer the phone. Literally. They wouldn't do it.
They figured it's not for them. They're like, it's for David.
It is. And I heard from people, I heard from people that I hadn't heard from, in years.
Mhm.
Incredible.
Oh,
So,
but with that, and I don't mean to cut you off or anything,
no,
but like with that, like, how did that, I'm gonna go back to the mental part. Like, but you
sure.
said like you've heard from people that you hadn't heard from in years, but they were not there for you before you had your attempt, right? So what were you mentally thinking? I know you were like grateful for them calling, but was it kind of like a where were you? Like mentally, what got you to that point?
To the bad point.
Yes, because I know I just
Oh,
asked you twofold questions right
no,
there.
no, no.
Okay.
Well, no. So one, to answer the first part of the question, one, no, there was no resentment, no anger, not even any curiosity about like where have you been.
Hmm.
It didn't come into my consciousness.
Okay.
So for me, what I talk about in when I go out and I teach and present to all different types of audiences is to talk about the driving factor for me, and I think I think it's the driving factor for most all people with suicide is depression.
Hmm.
And if I look at the genesis of mine started when I was 12, when unfortunately I was brutally raped on multiple occasions by a Boy Scout leader. And every time this thing did these things to me, he told me that they were initiations and all the boys go through it, but we don't talk about it. And
Hmm.
so I'm 61 years old, and this happened back in the 70s. And so you just didn't. So if I look at, I, I, I think my depression started and suicidal thinking started when I was 12 years old. And so it, by the time I was 48, it had been a well ingrained just pattern of thought. And there's a great quote from Chef David Chang, who's like a Gordon Ramsay level chef, and he's had his own struggles. And he has this great quote in which he says, when you're depressed, you're convinced that everything you think is true.
Hmm.
And I'm like, oh, chef, that's so right.
Yeah.
And so it's
Hmm.
not about if it's interesting if and this is pretty common if you talk to attempt survivors. It's pretty rare that you will hear a suicide attempt survivor blame anybody else. They,
Hmm.
they won't. It's what I think universally what we feel is tremendous self-hatred and self-loathing. We become convinced that we are worthless, even if we're running a nationally recognized end-of-life animal sanctuary. We feel that the world would literally be substantially better off without us. We just, and again, to what the chef says, you're convinced these things are true. And it ultimately becomes, it's a, it's like that pattern of thought becomes so well established that then it has a corresponding or there's a correlated level of feeling that goes with it. And the feeling it is, I mean, one person said it's a sense of isolation so profound it has no words. It just, and it's interesting, and people, people think, well, I know what it's like to be depressed because I know what it's like to be sad. And I'm like, no, actually, no. And I work with kids, and kids are amazing. So I was working with a group of second graders the other day, and I asked these kids, I said, hey, do you think there's a difference between sadness and depression? And the kids look at me like I'm an idiot. Like, of course there is. Like,
Mhm.
yes. And they said, okay, well, what's the difference? And here's what a little boy said. When you're sad, you know why, but when you're depressed, you don't.
Mm.
And I'm like, whoa. Like, yes. And then you take trauma,
Hmm.
put it, and trauma, the two best ways for me to explain it are it's the definition and a quote. So if you look at Cambridge Dictionary, because I'm a geek about definitions and quotes. So Cambridge Dictionary, trauma, severe and lasting emotional shock and pain caused by an extremely upsetting experience. Like, oh,
Hmm.
yeah, exactly. Oh, wow, yes.
Yeah.
And then what does it do? So check this out. Woman by the name of Jane Levy. Trauma fractures comprehension like a pebble shatters a windshield. The wound at the site of impact spreads across the field of vision, obscuring reality and challenging belief. I'm like,
Mm.
oh,
Yes.
right?
Wow. I can you can visualize
Right.
that.
It is
And
just
then it
so
just spreads.
exactly. So you think
That is,
about
man.
so you just think those things. And so to, very long-winded back to the point is, so I didn't have any, it wasn't for me, the people that called me that I hadn't heard from in years, I, it was like this sacred thing. Well, here, how it landed on me was like, wow, I'm worthy enough for you to call me.
Mhm.
That's where my thinking was. It wasn't where have you been? It's like, wow, you're like, there's got to be something. There's got to be something about me if this person takes the time to call.
Mhm.
That's fine. And it's interesting, just so it doesn't get lost. This as people say, what in the 13 years since, what's happened. I still got to manage my condition, and
Mhm.
I've been taught. So how do you clean the mess up? Well, you clean the mess up. Mental health is okay. Body, mind, spirit. So diet, sleep, exercise, time outside, meds, counseling, support group, and then my own spiritual practice. So, and then purposeful work. So my work now is to go and to share my story from mental hellness to mental wellness, and to give people who don't know a better understanding of depression and what could have somebody cause to take their life. But then also well, what do we do? And for me, it's about making prevention doable, because you think about suicide prevention, it's just like, oh man, that's like, wow, and for me, it's all about creating connection. And like this today with you, amazing soul, this is connection. It is,
Right. Hmm.
it is,
And I agree. I completely agree, because when you have those connections, like you said, when you were on the bridge, that person made a connection with you. And when you have those connections make you feel a little bit more like you're worthy of being here, because you have a connection with someone. And it's like that phone call you said, you felt like, oh, I was worthy enough for you to call and for you to connect with me. And so I do want to ask you that. So before your attempt, like you say, you had all of these things that you dealt with from 12 years old all the way throughout life. I want to ask you, how did that? I'm skipping, you talked about the mental and the emotional. I'm
Okay.
skipping those. And I'm going to go to, how did that affect you socially? Because the reason I ask,
Oh,
because people in the audience, I have an audience like you say you were working with seventh graders. I actually, that's the class I teach, seventh graders, and a lot of my students listen to a lot of my episodes. And so from that time all the way to now, how did it affect you socially and the things you did? Because you got married, you had a life, but socially, did that impact the way you interacted with people and all of those things up until 48, you said?
yeah. Yeah, I think I was an incredibly great actor. Um, so it was because you would have I was gregarious, to raise money for all that. It was very expensive to run the sanctuary. So a lot of it was, I was the face of the sanctuary to go out and do fundraising events and everything else. So while my persona was X, let's say what was going on the inside was Y. And it was, and I think in part, Tracy, what happens to in terms of, so why August 31st, 2011? Why there? I think just because it couldn't it couldn't maintain the persona anymore. It was just too much. It was because it was a lie. It wasn't that I didn't love people and animals and things like that, but it was just like, but I'm fighting constantly that I'm worthy. Like I feel like I'm totally worthless. Like I have no redeeming value whatsoever. Not anything. Like you can't, like it is close to impossible to live when you
Like,
when you feel that you are absolutely worthless.
right. And you just said, like, you nailed it. You said you was a great actor. And
Oh,
so that whole time you were the face and you were the social person, but that was the outside. But inside, your emotional and your mental thoughts was really like was tearing you apart. And so I do want to, I want to hop now back to once you were in the institute after the attempt, those
mhm.
15 days. And I know, like you said, did you start then? Is that when things started to kind of change mentally and emotionally for you?
That's a great question. I mean, I'm sure that was, if you look at, like, what was the real point, the initial point of change. I'm sure it was certainly there. I don't, there was nothing recognizable at that point. Um,
Mm,
just because it was just the totality of the situation was just kind of overwhelming, quite frankly.
mm,
Um, yeah. So, but that certainly that was the beginning. I mean, without a doubt, just those 15 days, there was nothing negative. Let me say it this way. It it was nothing but positive the entire
mm.
the entire 15 days. And I know
Okay.
some people, they don't have that experience in a psych ward. But
Mm,
I mean, I have continued experience now with a psychiatric hospital. Um, and in what happened at the end of last year, depression has always been there for me to manage, and
mm,
suicidal thinking is always there for me to manage. But I had learned, and practices and all these different things. But at the end of last year, man, Tracy, depression came in with like a hurricane force that just took me to my knees and had me wish to die. Like I'd
mm.
want, and my beloved, my fiance, this extraordinary human being, said that every day I just would beg her to let me die. And so didn't know what to do because we was taking meds and doing counseling and all these other things. And so there was one thing that we were led to, but there's stigma and fear around it. And it's what they call ECT, and it's electroconvulsive therapy. It's shock therapy. And what I can tell you is 30 sessions later, over the last 6 months, my life has changed.
Wow, from the ECT?
Yes, ma'am. It is. And let me tell you two things that is just so. I had recently had a day in which just things were not going well. In the past, that would be a day of depression. Like that's where that would be. And you know what it was instead now? And this is because of ECT. You know what it was? It was disappointment. And that is totally different.
Yes, instead of depression, it was disappointment.
Exactly.
Yes.
And I'm like, that's from ECT. And the other thing is that ECT has completely taken away any thought of suicide. Now, I've carried thoughts of suicide for 50 years in my mind, and 30 electroconvulsive. 30 sessions. It doesn't exist.
That is awesome. Can you explain? And I'm listening intensely, and I've heard of it before, and I've seen it, but I've never really talked to anyone who has went through it. Can you talk a little bit about it
Sure.
and what exactly
I can
did
talk.
it?
I can talk for days because I just this. So what it is so I go in, and let me say, so there's 2 doctors and there's 6 nurses, and so I've been going for 6 months. At first, we went 3 times a week in the acute phase because I was that bad, and I'm alive because of my doctor and my fiance and my family. And then it went to 2 times a week and once a week, but like in May, I only went twice. And in June, now I'm basically once a month in maintenance. So what I do is I go in and they put electrodes around my head. And then I go under general anesthesia. So I'm completely anesthetized. And while I'm asleep, they put enough electricity into my brain that purposely causes a 30 to 45 second seizure of my brain. And what happens is when the brain has a seizure, there's a chemical reaction. And it's the cumulative chemical reactions for me, because I was on the more severe side, over 30 sessions, has changed the chemistry of my mind. And I wake up from the session like I'm waking up from a nap. I mean, again, I've had 30 sessions. I've never felt pain. I've never had it has been nothing but it's been amazing. And added to that are the people that I've gotten to know who are on the medical staff of Sutter Psychiatry, and the doctors and the nurses. Again, you get to know people pretty well. That's a very intimate setting over 6 months. And these 2 most recent experiences, the one this past week in which I realized that I'm like, wow, man, this is a tough day. I'm like, I'm not feeling depressed. I mean, I'm not happy, but I'm not depressed. Like, what is this feeling? I mean, oh, wow, that's disappointment. Like, disappointment is finite, it's a thing. You can hold it, you can look at it, mess with it. Depression, you can't do any of that.
Oh, it's like abstract.
Well, remember again what the second grader says. When you're sad, you know why. When you're depressed, you don't.
Right.
It's this thing. Disappointment. That's like, I could,
I can
I
get
could do
rid of that.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And then, to not, my automatic place to go for so long was, well, I can just kill myself. To
Mhm.
now, if I think about suicide now, it would be, if I may, Tracey, it'd be like how you probably think about it, as like, oh gosh, wow, that, awful, terrible, you know, avoid at all costs, all those different things. Like that's
Mhm.
how I think about it now. Whereas in the past, for 50 years, it was like this thing that I could always go to if I
Go
needed it.
to, yeah. I was
Now,
I was thinking that it was like your go-to, like if something's going wrong or something's not, oh, you know what? I can just say and it'll just be over. And I know that's how some people do think and how some people feel.
exactly. And now it's not there. It's just, it's like, it is, it's, it is amazing. And so now in my talks, I include talk about ECT, and my want is that if there's somebody in the audience maybe who has gotten to a place where their depression is treatment resistant, that maybe they hear my experience of ECT and then they go do it.
Right.
And my prayers were answered. I gave a talk at a church last Sunday, and at the end of the service, an 86-year-old woman came up and said, "Did the ECT really work?" And I said, "Sister, I promise you it did." And she said, "Man, God, I've always been afraid to do it, but my depression." And so there, I feel like, wow, my story can help somebody.
And it will. And I know it will. And that's what I was gonna ask you next. What advice would you give someone who maybe, and let's do this twofold. What advice would you give someone who might be at the beginning state of experiencing the depression? Because, like you said, you have those levels to where you got to the point where your depression was treatment resistant.
Yep.
And I never thought about that. Like, wow, there's a possibility to get to that point where there's another level where it doesn't even resist the treatment that's being given. So, could you answer that on both levels? Advice for someone who's feeling it and they just now are really, you can try to get them out and pull them out before it even gets to that next level. And then those that may be at
Yeah.
that level.
Yeah, and I'd say for the ones, my brothers and sisters out there who are at the early stages of depression, just a couple of things. One, depression lies. So don't, it is the greatest liar of all time. Remember what the chef said, Chef Chang. When you're depressed, you're convinced that everything you think is true. So just realize it's a lie. The thought of that the world will be better off without you, it's a lie. We're all imperfect. We all make mistakes. We all do stupid things, but we also have corresponding aspects of who we are that people really, people really like. And, 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 and so all I'm saying is if I had to pick one thing to do, if you're on the early stage, is find a counselor, a therapist, a, a, somebody to just be able to have to dialogue about how you feel. Do that. That in and of itself will be phenomenally helpful, because what it will allow is you'll have this other person who is a great listener, and you may say boom, 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 and they'll say, well, wow, I see it as X, and you'll be like, oh my gosh, I never considered that. Or
Mm.
you may be just totally floored that somebody has such a different opinion or a perspective, and then you look at it, and then, you know, I've had it recently with my fiance, who has helped me look at a couple of things about my own behavior and ways that I was doing things. I'm just like, oh my gosh, like, that's incredible. So, but it requires another person. And then for my brother or sister who's at the end, if you can get ECT, if you can get shock therapy, do it. It is phenomenal. And if you can't, I think be with somebody to dialogue about what you're thinking and how you're feeling. Those two things.
Mm-hmm.
And then do that. But if you're at the extreme point like I was, and you can do ECT, it is, I'm telling you, it doesn't hurt. You don't wake up in the middle of it. And like it is literally, they put some stuff around your head, you go to sleep, and you wake up like you've been in a nap. And
Mm-hmm.
it's, and you can feel like really different.
Man, I'm so glad that you talked about that, because I know that that's something that isn't talked about a lot. ECT is something, like you said, like people like may have heard of it, like me, I've heard of it, but never would have known that it works, you know. And I could just see from your passion and your expression about it that it works. And the other thing you said was being able to talk to somebody. A lot of times that's like at those earlier stages, people
Yep.
hold it in and they keep everything bottled up, and they never release it to where those thoughts just keep piling up. And until you let it go and talk to somebody, those thoughts will never remove themselves unless you let it out. And if someone wanted to connect with you, because I know, like you speak, like you say, you spoke at a church last week. How could someone reach out to you to book you or to get you to come and speak for them?
No, well, thank you. Yeah, and I speak all over the world. I've trained tens of thousands of servicemen and women in all branches of the military. I do a lot with schools, do a lot in the faith-based community, and in community mental health and businesses as well. And really my whole desire is to just bring a different conversation around suicide in particular, and to make prevention doable. Because I have a very specific way in which, like the police officer, my belief is connection creates hope, and hope saves lives. Because
That's
so people can get in touch with me. Telephone number is 916-247-6389. And then, of course, email is David at, and then it's my full name, David Woods Bartley.com. And if you just Google David Woods Bartley, I was blessed to do 2 TED Talks. And they're a lot of fun because they have some really great animal stories that I from the sanctuary that I use. The first is how connection saved my life, and the second is how to save a life by sitting down. So then on Facebook and on LinkedIn and Instagram, I think the telephone number and the email address are there as well. So, but I would love to. I just my purpose in life is to get this message out and to share and to teach as many people as I possibly can.
Yes. And what I will do, everyone, at the end, so keep watching till the end. At the end, in the outro, I'll have all of his information, all of his links, the phone number, and his email. So make sure you check that out. And for my listeners, I'll have it in the show notes so that you can take advantage of connecting more with David. And before we leave and before we wrap up, Are there any last words of encouragement that you would like to leave with the audience?
Yes, I would. Thank you. Before I do, but thank you so much, not only for allowing me to be on the show, but for you doing what you do. So just like, thank you.
You're
So
welcome.
there is a wonderful, wonderful psychiatrist, Dr. Drew Ramsey. And Dr. Ramsey, he's a professor. He's very much into nutrition. He sees clients, incredible human being. Never met him, but I'm a big fan of his work. And Tracey, he has a quote, which to me puts all my work into a simple paragraph. And this is how what it is. And so you imagine this is a man that specializes in meeting with people like me who are suicidal. So here's what Dr. Ramsey reminds us. Someone you see today is thinking about killing themselves. Your smile, your question, your love could save them. Trust me, they told me it did.
Wow. And I'm not even going to add any more. Man, yes. Trust me, they told me it did. And that I am gonna add, I'm a talker, but that is like I was trying not to, but I have to. That is like for real, guys. Like to anyone listening and to those watching, like that is so for real. Your smile, your question, your connection could save someone's life. And I tell my students this all the time. You never know what someone is going through. You never can tell sometimes just from the way they act or they interact what they're feeling and going through on the inside. So that smile, that hello, that connection can and will save someone's life. Mr. David, I thank you so very much. And I'm gonna go check out those TED Talks too, because I'm interested in hearing more about the animal stories, most definitely.
Oh, they've been great. You Miss Tracey, you will love the first one. Has a great story about a horse named Odie, and the other has a story about a dog named Murphy.
And make sure I will put those links for his TED Talks also at the end, so you can go and click and check out his TED Talks. So as we wrap up today, as we wrap up another episode, again, this was an amazing episode. I learned so much, and I know and I hope that your story, not hope, I know that your story is going to change the lives of people, not just someone, of people out there who are experiencing and going through those same situations in life. And thank you for sharing. Thank you for your transparency and being willing to open up about your life.
No, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm supported by amazing people. Yeah, I'm a blessed man.
Yeah, because I just know that that's not easy. And I know that a lot of people wouldn't. And I appreciate you for being someone that will. So I'm going to leave you with a quote, the quote that I leave you all with for every episode, but it's a powerful quote that I like for you to hold on to. If you want to be sad, keep thinking about the past. If you want to be anxious or worried, keep thinking about the future. But if you want to be happy, focus on the present and be grateful for the things that you have. This is Tracey D. Armstrong. Have a good day, y'all.